May I have your attention? Our recess has ended. We will reconvene this meeting. Would you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. I would like to thank many of you who were really gracious in emailing and contacting the council. Excuse me. We all heard from a number of people. I don't have an exact count, and also bear with us tonight. We actually have house sound, so we might have a little feedback once in a while. We heard from many, many people. I'm really impressed with the number of people that reached out to the council, so thank you to all of you. And thank you to the council. This has been a really tough week, and everyone's seated at this table and walking behind it has worked very hard this week, and I thank you all for everything that you've done. I appreciate it very much. Before we get too far into our session tonight, I would like to acknowledge that today is our Chief of Police, George Merkel's birthday. Happy birthday, Chief. So I want to remind everyone that this is actually a working council meeting. We have things to accomplish tonight, and we don't want to be here until 2:30 in the morning, although I think every one of us up here will do so if that be necessary. So we're going to do things a little differently tonight. We have to limit our public comment as much as possible, so we'd like to limit your comments to about 3 minutes, and I have a stopwatch here. And also, we heard it from a number of you that I see at our last session, so I would ask first that everyone who has not spoken to the council before, please come forward first. We're going to ask you to come forward and please give us your name and address the council, not the audience, please. And there is a sign-in sheet that is going around the room that is for our city clerk's records, so please make sure you all sign in. I think that's it before we get started. So the council will resume their deliberations of the motion that is on the table.
So we do have a motion on the table. I would like to make a couple of motions before we get back to that one that will be pertinent. I would move to allocate $15,000 from the Water Tower Fund to pay for the City Hall Vergennes Opera House boiler, our portion of it. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? All
I'd
those,
like to make a friendly amendment.
please.
I would like to suggest the following. The $50,000 from the general fund balance comes into the account to offset the general fund expenses. Use $13,500 from the watershed fund for recreation. $72,500 of bonded debt stays in the water tower fund, and no police cuts.
So I think actually we do have a motion, Lynn, that we can operate on first, and then we can address your issues in a separate motion if you'd like. Is that acceptable to you?
The other way you just get bogged down with so much.
Right. We can do them one at a time, and I think we can get through this more quickly. All right? Any discussion on the motion on the floor? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Mark, did you have another?
Yes, move to encumber $12,500 each year for the next 4 years from the Water Tower Fund to cover the sidewalk, our grant matching project for this, the sidewalk project from McDonough to the basin. Thereby, at the end of 4 years, we will have $50,000 clearly set aside for that issue.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Motion,
I abstain.
I say no.
Adjacent property owner.
very well. One abstention, one nay. One nay.
Alderman Donald.
Who abstained? I'm sorry.
Bill. Alderman Benton.
Great. Thank you.
Alderman Donald.
And then back to the motion on the table. I would amend the original motion to remove the line item for the boiler that we've now placed into Water Tower Fund, remove the line item dealing with sidewalks, which we've now put into Water Tower Fund, and reduce the, from 2 full-time employees from the police department to 1 full-time employee reduction.
Motion made, is there a second?
I would remove the $50,000 or $15,000 dealing with the boiler, because now we have it separate. I would remove the $12,500 from the boiler, and the original motion made 2 meetings ago was 2 FTE reductions in the police. It would now be reduced to 1 FTE.
I'll second.
Motion made and seconded. Discussion. David?
I've had this conversation individually with most of these folks at this table. My position is at this point, we're going about this backwards. We've had a lot of discussion relative to the expense side. We've had virtually none relative to the revenue. There's a lot of unknowns, and we do need to set a tax rate. We're trying to hit a moving target with regard to a lot of these budget issues. The one discussion that I think that we can have, and what we can come to some level of understanding on, is how much of your money are we going to allow you to keep? You know, when we left this meeting Tuesday, you know, as somebody who's lived here my entire life and spent a lot of time sitting at this table, I was absolutely amazed at what it was that we were actually considering in terms of an increase in tax rate. And I think that when most people look at that and they take a long, hard look at it, it's going to hurt too much. There's probably a lot of folks that aren't going to like it, but it's not make it or break it for them. I think of one of my elderly neighbors who just at 80 some odd years old just retired and quit a full-time job, and I have a really hard time asking her to go back to work to cover another $500 or $600 in taxes. What I've heard from people is I don't want my taxes to go up, and what I've heard from people is that I value the efforts of law enforcement in the city of Vergennes. I think we can set a tax rate. I'm not comfortable at this point, sitting here tonight, that we can resolve these budget issues knowing what we know. That's all.
Very well. Any other discussion?
I have a question, David. How do you propose to arrive at that tax rate?
I think it's relatively simple. I mean, you know, where we ended up, I mean, was Matt's original proposal was a 10% increase over last year. That's as good as it's going to get. How many people got a 10% raise last year? How many of you have $6,000 liquid to retire the debt that's every living being in this state owns a portion of 3.5 times gross annual revenue of unfunded debt obligations in the state of Vermont? That's not our problem to solve, but it's going to affect you when you pay your taxes. So that's my question.
Mayor?
Yes.
I would just like to say that I had a difficult time rationalizing 2 full-time employees leaving the police department. However, a lot of the people I spoke to in the emails I got supported a more reasonably affordable police department, and therefore I would support the amendment that we remove one full-time employee.
I would say that I also received a lot of communication this week since our last meeting here. A lot of folks concerned about their taxes going up. A lot of folks passing on admiration for our police department, but extremely sensitive to the fact of what they're looking at, and when they're thinking about making that choice, they were in support of a reduction in staff. They felt that, again, this is folks reaching out, they felt that there was adequate, and there could be still adequate measures taken to keep Vergennes a very safe community. And they were specifically talking about Matt's original budget. So, in taking those notes from them, I would be in support of the amendment.
I just have a comment. Things have changed since Tuesday, and I think that should be explained.
It will be.
Well, we're making decisions before there's an explanation. And I don't think that's right.
Well, you haven't taken a vote yet.
Yeah, I understand, but there's things that have changed that should be told to the public. And the other thing is, if we make this decision to release one person before we look at all the other alternatives, because you asked me to wait, I don't think that's fair. There's also money being carried over that no one has put into some of this thinking ahead of time, which has reduced what we were talking about the other day substantially, actually. We're talking about 3 cents, at least 3 cents. So before anyone makes any decisions about eliminating anyone, and I will say right now to everyone, I totally think this is done incorrectly. I think it's done wrong. I totally believe that we should give the police department the 2 people they're asked for and not wait until the 11th hour or 11 and a half hours to riff someone. I think the process was wrong. I think doing it at this point is wrong. And I understand about the taxes. I truly do. But, we also have people that lives are being affected by this decision that haven't had time to look at the whole budget, the revenue coming in, other ways to finance things, and just taking them individually like this, like we're voting on, isn't fair to to other suggestions of where that money should come from. That's my comment.
This might be an appropriate time for the city manager to bring us up to speed.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So since Tuesday, I think on Tuesday we had reported that we anticipated a negative fund balance. We had inverted a number and there was an incorrect formula on the spreadsheet that we were using. The fund balance at present, and again, this is a projection that will change somewhat over the next 5 weeks. The current fund balance to carry forward is $91,598. Additionally, and I think former manager Hawley had picked up on it on Tuesday as well, there was a problem with the grand list. We have onboarded a new assessor program company, Nimric, who runs all of our accounting software and our grand list software. They had made an error as well in the grand list computation. So the original budget, as I had presented it, set a tax rate of 90.3 cents. My current projection on that budget is 87 cents. Alderman Koning has the numbers that he is working through and presenting bring a tax rate to 89.2 cents, and Alderman Donnelly's presentation is at 91 cents. And there's been many, I spent my week slicing and dicing this, each way that the individual alderman wanted it done. So we've moved a lot of we moved a lot of money around on paper. But that's, you know, that's where we are right now. And Alderman Donnelly is absolutely right. We are late. I accept the responsibility as your city manager for us being as late as we are. I thought we were better prepared on Tuesday to have had more of this dialogue in advance. We did not accomplish that on Tuesday, but ultimately the budget is my responsibility, and I accept the responsibility for us being here on a sweltering Friday night.
Very well. So, Lynn, to your point, the motion that we are currently voting on is an amendment to the budget as proposed. All that will still, of course, allow you to vote against the budget should that motion pass.
But what I'm saying, it's not, if we vote this right now, it doesn't give us an alternative to other suggestions of cash. So you do it the way you need to do it.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with Alderman Donnelly's assertion. I'm not sure how to proceed, but I think it's probably inappropriate for us to take a vote, particularly on the most contentious item, until other alternatives have been surfaced.
Fair enough.
Can she give an overview as a comment to this particular amendment to discuss her potential amendment?
I think she can make a counter motion if we wanted to do it that way, you know, line by line. And then there's a discussion, and then it comes back to,
We can proceed as you would like to proceed. I realize there are other issues that you would like to bring up. You can certainly ask for a friendly amendment from Alderman Koenig.
Or I can table this amendment, you can present one, and we can discuss that.
Alderman Koenig, have you gone through your entire
I believe so. I think there was
Proposal?
just the 3 changes to the original budget.
Okay. I think it's prudent, Mr. Mayor, for everybody to have an opportunity to speak their proposals, and if Alderman Koenig is done, then it would be
It's fine.
prudent for Alderman
Absolutely.
Donnelly to go ahead. Then we're just going to have to come back to them item by item.
Item by item.
Okay. So my proposal does not have any police cuts. And basically, it's the system. So I will go back to where I started. There's a 91,000 plus amount of money being carried over from this year to next year. I would like to use 50,000 of that in the general fund to offset the expenses of the general fund. I would also like to use $13,000 from the watershed fund for recreation, a fund that it was set up to do. It was supposed to represent recreation. That's money that's sitting there, does not cost the taxpayer a dime. I'd like to, we had decided as a council last year when or the year we did the bond, that we would take $72,500 out of the water tower fund to help reduce the taxes at that point in time. I agree that that probably is not the best way to use those funds. However, we're in a totally different situation this year, and to change that right now, I think is not responsible on our part. I think we should continue the way we are until we can get everything back in order, understand what we have for revenue, understand what we have for true expenses, but until that's done, use that money from there as we all had agreed. That's my proposal.
Last year.
Last year, yes.
I did not agree, wasn't here.
I did not agree, I was not here.
Well, the ones that were.
So I'd like to hear comments on Alderman Donnelly's proposals from the council.
I agree with Lynn. I think that's the best way to go about this.
With regard to the watershed fund, I agree. I was thinking we would probably discuss that in the next month or two to figure out how that would best work, since that seems to be a moving target. If we can do that now, we can certainly go forward. I just was assuming the next, not before fall, that would be something we explore with the watershed and water tower funds, but that was on my list. I just wasn't sure it would work here. As for using water tower funds and the bond, I know we did it last year. I know we had the statement, we're in a place, we need to do this for this year. I don't think we should have in retrospect. It is not a capital improvement. It is a bond payment. The voters, when they voted to build the new police station, said, we're willing to pay the taxes it's going to take to pay off this bond. That's part of the tax base. That's not coming from water tower. And under water tower fund policy, I don't see how a bond payment actually really legitimately falls under how it's supposed to work. I mean, you know, it's supposed to be a capital improvement, and needs to meet one of the following expenditures will benefit citizens of Vergennes and increase the livability of the community. Expenditures shall promote projects that are promulgated in the municipal plan. Expenditures shall leverage with additional fund sources whenever possible. And the building itself was a capital improvement, but we agreed as voters to pay for it a certain way. And to now say we're going to pay for it a different way, even though we did it last year as a kind of a stopgap, I don't think we should continue a bad practice.
Can you explain why it was done last year as a stopgap?
I honestly don't remember.
Ultimately, what that accomplished was not increasing taxes appropriately, was ultimately what that accomplished for us.
And so if somebody could explain to me why in this particular year, when we're trying to keep taxes reasonable and keep our employees, why would we not continue this at least one more year till we have another budget session where we say, okay, we're going to do this a different way this year? It was voted by maybe most of us here.
The council
to do-
supported it,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So when we need this money, why are we taking it now when we have a situation where we're going to riff some people? So until somebody can justify that to me, and yes, it's a bond, but we had agreed, Mark, myself, David, and Lowell, that that's what we were going to do to keep the tax rate down. And I don't understand what anyone can argue, and even what he read is exactly what we were doing, trying to keep the tax rate down, doing a capital improvement. I don't think this is the year to try to change that.
I would respond that a bond is not a capital improvement, and that's what we're talking about now. And we did, as a council, make that decision. In retrospect, looking at it and thinking about it harder, that was taking a decision away from what the voters already told us to do with the money. So we actually overrode what the voters had told us they wanted us to do with their tax money, which was to pay off this bond for a new police department. So I think that our decision last year was actually an incorrect one. We shouldn't have done it that way, because that was not taking into account what the ballot had already told us. And we took it upon ourselves to override what the voters had told us to do with their money.
Mr. Mayor, I would add, though, that I do not feel that the $72,500 bond payment should be attributed solely to the police department budget. I think it should come out of the general fund budget, so it's not an artificial increase to the police budget. It is a city-owned building. It's used by the city employees, and the public is available. So I think that needs to be, it's an accounting thing, but I think we need to square that away.
Noted. Excellent point. Did you have a comment, Dan?
Well, just with regards to, again, why would we need to look at that this year? Lynn, I just wanted to respond to that. I think one thing that has been concerning to me and to the folks that I've heard from throughout this process is just thinking about the sustainability of everything we're talking about right now. The healthcare costs across the board are not going down. I mean, everyone's going to see healthcare costs increase, whether through their employer or also, we're talking about in our taxes, we're also talking about it in our personal lives as well. So I think that, to me, to answer that question, it's just a matter of, at some point, and I think you're getting to it too, like, we really need to figure out what we do about that, and it's gonna suck anytime we do it. And I think right now we're in that particular situation.
Okay, then this is what I say to that, is that we're in a transition year. We had a new manager. We got the budget a little later than we would have ordinarily if he'd had more, help and input. This year, we could take the time to find out what other insurances are available, what other grants are available, but to throw the baby out with the bathwater right now, I think is a terrible, terrible mistake. And all we're trying to do at this meeting tonight is come up with a tax rate. It's not going to be the same tax rate we had last year. It can't be, because there's automatically 4 cents. But at the same time, to preserve what we have built in this city, and if we can come up with ways which maybe are not, it's a paper trail. I just don't want us to make another mistake. And I agree that the bond should be all on the whole budget, not just the police department. We all voted for that. I voted for that. I want us to look at trying to just get through this year until we can look at some of those things more carefully than we have been able to do in a month. That's my argument. And I agree with Mark totally. It probably should have never come out of the bond, out of the water tower fund, I mean, but it did. And it is not a life and death situation if it comes out of the water tower fund one more year if we save 2 of our employees. That's my argument.
David.
So at the end of Tuesday's meeting, I had asked the question of Chief, what does 7 officers, and specifically what does a 7-officer schedule look like? And I'd also asked what a schedule looks like with 5. And apparently now at this juncture, we probably ought to have a look at 6. And Chief came back from his vacation to attend and answer those questions, so I appreciate that, Chief. So we heard and we understand what 7 looks like. I'd like to hear from Chief what 5 looks like in terms of coverage, because really what we're talking about here, folks, we're talking about level of service. What's a level of service that's appropriate, and what's a level of service that we can all live with financially? That's going to dictate what the coverage is. It's just simple math. And the coverage is going to dictate how many officers we have on duty and what it's going to cost. So I think before we go any further, I mean, I'd like to hear from Chief what that looks like.
David, excuse me. It's a great idea, but I don't know why we should talk about 5 when that seems to be off the table. Why not talk about 6? Because that's what the amendment speaks to.
I understand that, and we can do that, that's fine. I'm just referencing the question that I asked at the meeting, and I'd like to give Chief the opportunity to respond to it. But either way, it's fine with me. Talk about what 6 looks like.
Stan doesn't go by. Town meeting that runs around with a microphone when you need him. All right, I'm going to stand right here. How's that? I'm not going to turn my back on anybody. I'll just kind of rotate around here. Anytime you have a...
I'm sorry, please address the council.
I'm sorry. All right. Anytime you have anytime you have a reduction in manpower, you're going to increase the number of single officer shifts. If you go to a 5-officer program or schedule, you're going to go down from, you're going to reduce or increase the number of single officer shifts from 4 to 6. 4 to 6. And on top of that, now if there is an officer that goes on vacation, goes out on sick leave, goes to training, now you're going to open that up even more. There's only so many hours these guys will work. It's a 40-hour work week. And now you're talking roughly an 8-hour shift, 5 days a week. And again, when you reduce the pool of officers to respond to those contingencies, then you're going to increase the overtime. And you're going to make it more difficult for guys to take time off. You're going to increase the amount of stress officers have. I can't tell you enough, folks. I mean, I know you've been inundated with phone calls. You've been inundated with facts and figures that I've sent you, how many calls for service we have. And believe me, my focus is this. There's 2 objectives here. My mission is the safety of the city of Vergennes. I also have a responsibility to tell you when I think our officers are being put in a more unsafe position by increasing the number of single officer shifts. I know you've received phone calls. I know you received the documentation, and I'll be glad to send you more. It is not safe for officers to work single officer shifts. You never know. You can do all the analysis you want on how many days a week, what times of the day, what days of the week you have more calls. You never know. Case in point, the incident that Officer Harder went to. Case in point, the incident Corporal Greenslet went to. Case in point, the incident Sergeant Ouellette went to. And I'm not willing, I can't be silent about that. I mean no disrespect to anybody. And again, you hired me to look after the safety of the city. That's what I'm doing. I'm not trying to be obstinate. I have an obligation, and I've got to live with myself, and that's what I'm doing. So in answer to your question, it's going to have a degradation. It's going to adversely impact all the way down the line. It's like a pebble in the pond. As the ripples go out, they get larger and larger. Well, like I say, if you reduce to 5, you're going to have more officer fatigue. You're going to have less officers available for overtime shifts to respond to the contingencies, and you're going to have more officer stress. And you could ask any one of my officers how they feel about this. Do they think it's safe? Do they think it's a wise idea? I know I speak for my department. I speak for my department, and I accept the responsibility of the good and bad. I'm standing here before you tonight. I think this is a bad idea if you reduce it. And I'm not trying to be difficult. I wish I had a magic wand. I wish I could do something. But I can't. But I'm telling you, this is going to have a bad effect on what's going to happen in the city. Thank you.
Did your question get answered, David?
It did.
Any other comments from the council? Mel, do you mind?
My first question is, are you taking discussion from the people that are here tonight?
Momentarily, we'll move to that. Yep. Was there any other comments coming from the council? And now is the time for the public comment. So if you are interested in addressing us, please come forward. We're going to give you about 3 minutes to speak. And I have a pretty good memory, so I remember who was here talking on Tuesday. Michael, you did not.
I'm going to use a little of my time. Thanks for speaking. I'm going to speak. First off, have you considered no wages increase? Have you freeze the wage? Have you looked at other possibilities of other cuts in other departments? Have you looked at the revenue that you're going to lose from tickets? I know this is a sensitive thing that's not supposed to be out in the media, but have you looked at the numbers you're going to lose in revenue from the tickets that won't get written for speeders that are going through the town, creating an unsafe environment?
Would you like to address that at all?
In preparing for my budget, I took feedback from counselors and from my own experience on the city council to answer back to a comment that Alderman Donnelly made. You know, an alderman spoke to me regarding getting the water tower fund cleaned up, so and moving the bonded debt back into the police department budget, Lynn. So that's why that was presented as it was. Regarding revenue, Mr. Daniels, you know, George and I talk about revenue a lot, and we are not you know, we're not Bridgewater, right? We're not ranked highest in the state for tickets, although I think a lot of our people who go through the community may disagree. We have, to the best of my knowledge, in recent history, never made our revenue number. 2 years ago, we raised the revenue projection from $60,000 to $80,000. I think we missed that by $17,000 and change. We lowered it back down to $60,000 last year. Currently to date, we are, again, I think about $47,000. So Chief and I have had a lot of conversation about budget and this budget proposal as well. He has advocated to, you know, increase the revenue, but I don't feel confident in being able to offset expenses based on the current trend as it comes to the revenue generated by the police department.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things that obviously is a little surprising here is that on Tuesday, the citizens were told that there was a $69,000 deficit, and on Friday, the citizens are told there's $91,000 to the black. Obviously, I think that everybody in the room, including those at the front of the room, would conclude that that's a bit embarrassing and quite frankly, a bit disturbing. But that's the way it is. Here's my suggestion. It's the 28th of June, and we've talked about how this process should have started a long time ago. And believe me, I am not a person that loves kicking the can down the road, but I'm going to suggest that you do hang on to this can for a little while and discuss it down the road. I'm going to suggest that whether or not the $72,500 is in the police budget or not in the police budget really doesn't make any difference to me. I'm sure you could take it out of the police budget and you could go line by line through the Public Works Department budget, the administration budget, and find $72,500 worth of capital improvements that you've actually allocated for that could come out of the water tower fund. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't affect the tax rate one iota, all right? So it's really just strictly an accounting matter. And Mark, if you really feel that this precedent, this so-called precedent, this one-year precedent that occurred really should stop, I'd suggest, you know, in the spirit of keeping the tax rate stable, which was the basis for using that a year ago, I think that I'm hoping that Alderman Donnelly would agree that if you found $72,500 that you could shift to the water tower fund, she would probably move on to the next problem because it accomplishes exactly the same thing. So I would challenge you to do that, actually. The other thing is that, again, it's June 28th. I really am struggling emotionally with the thought of laying off one or two or any municipal employees with 2 days' notice. That is just ridiculous. You know, this probably should have been talked about 6 months ago. So here's what my suggestion is. You have a $91,000 carryover. That number is going to move. Matt is absolutely correct. That number will move a bit. There's a lot of variables. I won't bore you with the accounting, but it will move. That is not the number. If it turns out to be the number, it's only based on luck. It'll be something higher or something lower than that number. I'm going to suggest that you budget for the two officers, but not make it automatic if an officer chooses to leave. Just don't make it automatic. Just like, and no different than the city council mid-budget decided to make the accounts payable position full-time. You did that mid-budget. It wasn't part of the budget. You did it mid-budget. So there was an instance where you actually increased a staff member from part-time to full-time without a budget, mid-budget. What I'm suggesting to you is to budget for the current department, as Alderman Donnelly is saying, but do not replace that person automatically. When there is an opening in the police department, you revisit that. Take your time, do more research, but don't be laying off people with 2 days' notice. And I think that now that we've figured out the grand list here, I do read the Addison Independent and gave Joan a call and stopped up and met with Matt and Jeff and found the error. It's obviously it was just an entry error. It was a $36 million entry error, but that's okay. It's an error. It got found. All right. I really think that the current tax rate is 83.5 cents. I think you've heard a number of people saying, if we have to pay a little more, if it's police or if it's admin or if it's sidewalks or if it's roads or whatever, people are saying, fire, yeah, if you want to pay a little more, it's okay, all right? Not 20 cents, but I think that if you can get a rate somewhere in the 88, 89, 89.5 cents, if you can get something in there, keep the police department full, all right? Again, visit it when you have the opportunity. Let's move on and get the tax bills out.
May I ask first if anybody else would like to speak? Yes, you did not speak tonight. So tonight you have not spoken. Oh, did we have another non-speaker?
I think,
Cheryl. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were waiting for the mic.
I just didn't want to follow Mel.
Yeah.
no one does.
I mostly want to commend you for looking at the budget in the way that you are. I feel it is very brave to say anything that sounds negative against the police force. I have respect for Chief Merkel, a great deal of it, but I don't know that the size of our police department fits our city. It feels like a lot of our taxes are going into one basket. And having worked on the municipal development plan, we have a lot of resources that are awesome in Vergennes. The fire, the waste treatment plant, the Bixby Library, the Opera House. We have a lot of wonderful things about Vergennes. The police is one of them, but I don't know that most of my taxes should go in that direction. So I actually think you're very brave to take a look at it and maybe are thinking about reducing a little bit to fit the size of Vergennes. And I understand a lot of people feel passionate about our police force, but I'm also passionate about other things. I think climate change is the #1 issue we face, and I'd love to see us as a town support the state of Vermont's goal of going to 90% renewables by 2050. That's really important to me. I understand that there's a lot of importance to everybody, and looking at what is balanced for Vergennes is a very good thing. I think your proposal sounds very responsible, and I support you.
Thank you.
Apparently you didn't expect any child-sized adults this evening. So I'm timing myself so I'm mindful and respectful of your time. I do want to just quickly address Mr. Austin's question to Chief Merkel about 5 to 7, or 7 to 5 rather. I work directly with law enforcement, and I can tell you what 5 to 7 looks like, and a major difference. I work primarily in prevention, but want to put it out there that I'm just representing Jesse Brooks this evening. But 5 to 7 looks very different. And it looks very different because I guess I want you guys to think about what you want from your law enforcement and what you want 10 years from now from your law enforcement and what you want this city to look like. Law enforcement is not a measurement of what they respond to only. Law enforcement does a lot of other quality work and should be able to focus on a lot of other quality work that should be preventative-based as well, okay? So the work that they do in the schools that is not response-based, the work that they do with our youth, the work that they do for other businesses, that type of thing. That's how we also measure our law enforcement, okay? So when we're thinking long-term, and we're thinking about investment, our law enforcement has a lot to do with that. And like I said the other day, when you're thinking about capacity and when we're thinking about development of the city, we don't have distractions right now. We don't have major distractions of crime and violence and drugs and out of control drivers so that we can focus on those other things. We can focus on climate change. We can focus on reusable bags. We can focus on those other things because they're doing their job. I obviously am not in favor of reducing the department staff. I am in favor of looking at innovative, different ways to generate funds and to save costs. And I understand that that's not something that can be done like that. But I am also wondering from you guys what you're thinking of and how you're thinking creatively, because we live in a different world. As you guys are all seeing, when you're looking at these budgets and when you're looking at these increases, and Vergennes didn't get revitalized on tradition, it got revitalized on innovation, okay? And if we're only thinking of traditional ways to save money and make money, then we're not moving in the same direction as the city. So I just ask you what you're thinking of and what you're potentially looking at as far as other alternatives to generate funds and to save costs. Thank you.
I would like to mention that there has been a lot of banter in the city to address your question actually directly about the local option tax. And I am actually pleased to tell you that I believe this council supports pursuing that, and we're in the process of formulating a committee. We actually have 2 committed members. We have not bitten off that until we got through the budget process, but I also want you all to realize that it'll take a couple of years. So it's not a fix for this next fiscal year and probably not even the fiscal year following that. But we are pursuing that in particular.
Great. Let me know if you need help.
I will. Would anyone else like to make a comment? Kevin.
Thanks. Kevin Rooney, most of you know who I am. I just have since we're restricted on time, I just created a list of comments and thoughts, so I gave a copy for you all. I'm just going to shoot through them. I'm going to read this, and you guys can discuss it and just have it. I'm short on time. I got to leave soon, so I just had some comments, and one is I just want everybody to know who don't know me. I grew up here, so I know what Vergennes used to be like. I'm actually a resident of Vergennes now. Some of you don't know that, but I am paying taxes here. I left college, so I wasn't here during that time frame, but I came back in 2006, and I've been working with a partnership since about 2010. So I'm aware of what's going on economically and vitality-wise, and what's been proved since I was growing up here. And I have a lot of respect and appreciation for what the police force has done, what the chief has done for us. It's awesome. I recall a police force that was pretty nasty and pretty useless back when I was growing up. But I do have to say that Vergennes was a safe place growing up. I grew up and I used to walk to school. I used to walk everywhere. I never felt like I was in danger. Granted, I wasn't out at 2 o'clock in the morning as a kid, but we were safe because it was a safe community even on its own. So I just want to make that clear. So let me just shoot to these comments. I guess I'd like someone to answer at some point, maybe it's even Chief, the point that Matt brought up during the last meeting, which I wasn't at, but I did watch the video, was if we have capacity to sell to other towns, why do we now not have capacity to reduce if we're not selling those services to their towns? That's just a question I think someone needs to have an answer for. And you guys have already offered us up a reduction of 1 officer, but what about maybe putting off a new vehicle for another year or so instead of paying for that new vehicle? Is it possible to have a second officer on call, not on duty pay, but on call duty? I don't know how the police force works. It's just I have a box kind of idea. Is it even possible to have an on-call, like an IT person who's on call with a beeper, and they have to stay in the area and be ready to respond, but not actually be on duty? It's just an idea. The other is, what are other cities our size doing with a reduction, restricted budget? Do they have 8 officers with a population of this size and this, with this density? Take a look at those things. I mean, I can't believe that we're the only city that has this, this kind of issue with a budget of police force of 40% of our budget. What responsibilities does the state police have for covering us if we have, a reduction in workforce? I mean, we pay taxes to the state. Are they supposed to come into Vergennes or not? I don't know what the answer to that is, but maybe that's something could be discussed. Does the grant money that we're getting for the one position cover all the expenses related to that employee, or is it just the hourly rate and a vehicle? What about their benefits, the health benefits, the increase in benefits, that kind of thing? If not, then that's, that additional person is hitting our tax dollars. I recall the police station, and when it was talked about how we're going to fund it, for some reason I recall it being talked about that the water tower fund would help offset the cost. I thought it was discussed, maybe it was just a possibility to discuss it, but I remember reading it in the paper saying, hey, we can.
Bought the bond down with money out of that, we lowered it by like a couple $100,000.
So it was already reduced by that?
But we did not promise the income would be used to pay the bond.
Okay. The other comment, Linda, I think you made in the last meeting was, we built a nice police station. I don't think we actually built it with the expectation that it was going to grow. So I kind of wonder about whether we have built this police station that we expected to grow to 8, but when Chief got here, I heard it was 4, and now it's 8. So how do we get from 4 to 8, and why? And, is there something that we can take a look at as the reason, is that still reasonable now? Chief Merkel had recommended combining workforce, police forces in the area. I think that's actually an awesome idea. I think I've talked to some of you guys in the past about creating a Greater Vergennes collaborative, where you have like an economic collaborative where our surrounding cities and towns get together and take a look at economic development and also shared services, whether it's fire, police, and whatnot, and creating one unit. And this collaborative could be represented by all the towns and take that and try and create some efficiencies, cost efficiencies across all of our union towns and cities. And then lastly, when you get a 15% health insurance rate increase, I guess there's got to be some questions asked, and I think Lynn had mentioned this earlier, that you take a closer look at it now. But when that comes down, there should be some tough questions as to why that 15% occurred, what drove it. Is there other options? Did the city and leagues actually take a look at other plans, other alternatives, think out the box a little bit? That's what companies do when they get this increase, to have someone come in and take a look at this and try and create some other alternatives. It's probably too late to do that now, obviously, but for next year, maybe go to someone else, a third party, a different association, and look for other rates, other alternatives, but also go back to the cities and leagues and say, okay, what other kind of plans can we put together, different, whatever it is, you can structure your HSA contributions, there's all sorts of things you can do. Are they doing that for you or not? And then I think lastly is, what is the employer contribution to the health premiums, and is there any way of moving that around to help out? So those are just some thoughts and ideas. That's all.
Did you want to address any of those?
Do you want me to address all of them, Mr. Mayor?
If you'd like.
I don't have an answer to number 1, which was if we had capacity for neighboring towns, why do we perceive not to have enough to cover the community? One of the things I had done, Kevin, was instead of having a capital purchase for an entire vehicle, I moved that to a lease. That saved us money over the course of the year. Chief and I would need to discuss, having an officer on call, or potentially, what that would look like. I had asked Chief Merkel a month ago, to contact his peers in other municipalities to see how they staff their municipalities with a similar size and population. I've not received that information back yet from Chief Merkel. As I spoke last time, again, we do have a good relationship with the state police. I think they are our first responders after 2 a.m. The grant does cover everything. It's 100% of Officer Stacy's salary, benefits, vehicle, and any associated equipment. The water tower fund is up for discussion. I don't have any comment on number 8, which was, did we build the police station, anticipating needing 8 officers? I do think that regional first responders is the wave of the future. I think that many municipalities, particularly in more remote areas than northern Addison County, but it actually makes a lot of sense for us. Other remote communities are looking at more regionalized coverage, both from rescue, fire, as is typically done now in a lot of areas, and I think the police department's going to fold into that as well. That's a pretty comprehensive question, but I think it should certainly be on the table. And then healthcare. So, in as much as maybe some of the feedback has not been as polite as maybe I would have chosen to have it, I think there's been a huge outpouring of information and dialogue with the community that I haven't experienced here in a long time. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that we've seen that could absolutely be incorporated and should be reviewed over the course of the next year. Healthcare costs, increasing by 15%, again, that's not sustainable. So how are we going to prepare for that? I do believe that, I'm just going to say, I want to back up and say something. I took the role in September, and in a lot of ways have been triaging, on a day-to-day basis, and that certainly has not changed in the last month. And then certainly in the last 4 days. I'm appreciative of the feedback that I'm receiving. And in a lot of cases, if you look at the budget, if there was a 2-year trend that Manager Hawley had established, I adopted the 2-year trend coming into the budget. Do I think we could, take $200 out of copy paper? I trust Mel's judgment. I went through a lot of copy paper this week, as you might imagine. So, I think everything should be on the table for the upcoming year. And I think it's, as I said at the outset, I wish it wasn't, Friday before the end of the month. It won't be this way again next year. And I would suspect that the council is going to come out of the gate in July and start to, vet the opportunities that have been presented to us. That's my objective. I think, I'm sorry, is it Jesse? Jesse, yeah, I think Jesse and Heather have given us some great ideas. I will tell you that a lot of the great ideas are not going to be popular with your municipal employees, because we're talking about things like having them contribute to healthcare. Well, without getting too far into it, that's a pay cut. Mr. Chaprini, I appreciate that. However, we're going from, hypothetical to real world here. And, so I hope that answers your questions, Kevin. And I just want to say that all the information that's been put forward to me has been shared with this council. And I think that there's at least there's opportunity for discussion about these topics, if not actual solutions coming out of those conversations.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Simmons want to speak first?
I have a question.
Sure.
We talk about how small Vergennes is. During the bulk of the day, what is the actual population in Vergennes? With all the traffic that drives through town, how many people do we estimate are actually in Vergennes during the bulk of the day?
Well, we know that 9,800 vehicles go through town every day.
$9,800. Okay, 9,800. Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Talk about. I'm just saying, 2 people, 9,800 cars, plus the people that live here. Do the math.
Thank you.
It's not a lot. It's not a lot of protection.
I'm Peter Guerin, known to most of you, I think. My comments mostly were designed to talk about the necessity of a police department that takes 40% of the budget in Vergennes and the number of officers that means. You folks have a very different issue in front of you. You have potential issue of a 2-day RIF, the fairness of that. You have the budget discussion that's in very much a state of flux, and you're in a 2 or 3 day situation. However, I still would like to speak to the issue of the number of police officers. Like everyone here, I would like to think that when I dial 911 in an emergency situation, I'm going to get an immediate response. I am willing to pay for that, no questions. What I'm not willing to pay for is to have a police officer go over to Shaw's and unlock a door, and we keep an officer on so that somebody can do that. I'm not willing to pay for the police department to police every single car that comes down 22A on their way to Burlington and Montreal with contraband. We're not the state of Vermont police force. We're a Vergennes police force. And whether that car goes through town and its way up to Burlington with whatever it's got with it doesn't affect my safety here in Vergennes. And I don't think that's something that I should have to pay for. I am absolutely not willing for our police force, I'm not willing to pay for our police force to send officers to Shelburne, Bristol, New Haven on non-emergency calls like drug assessment and have us pay for it. Let those towns pay for their own police coverage and let them pay for their drug experts. Why should our folks go up there on our dime? I'm also not willing for officers to sit in the parking lot out on Route 7 and monitor the stop sign, the traffic light, and 22A and 7. That's not a good use of officers. And if we have extra people on so somebody can do that, I don't think that's a good use of my tax dollars in Vergennes to keep me safe in Vergennes. And finally, I guess the other thing I would say that based upon what I have read about the desire to possibly have Vergennes cover Ferrisburgh and Panton, what that says to me, we were going to put an officer up there. We're not going to replace him in town. To me, that says we have one extra person on our police force that is not there for Vergennes needs. If we can send them up there and take that 40 hours out of our town, then we don't need as many officers as we have. The bottom line for me is that I think that our officer coverage is well above national and state averages for somebody this size. Perfect time. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Could I just make a point of clarification? Just as a point of clarification, the contracts for Panton and Ferrisburgh were not for full-time officer coverage. I don't have the details of the contract, but we would not be having a full-time officer allocated into those communities.
I'd like to just answer one thing Peter brought up, and Chris is here so he could verify this, but I don't know if boundaries are so important. Shaw's is in Ferrisburgh, but it's our grocery store. And the end of Moncton Road is in Ferrisburgh, but it's our Moncton Road. New Haven Road goes out into Route 7. My husband is a fireman for Ferrisburgh, and Vergennes and Ferrisburgh go to more accidents on 22A and 7 and New Haven Road and 7 than I hear anywhere else. And to not have a police officer out there protecting and keeping the other, as an example, I was coming off Moncton Road coming into Vergennes as a truck went through a red light at 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour. I do not think just because Route 7 happens to be in Ferrisburgh or part of 22A happens to be in Ferrisburgh that that's not our territory. So I disagree with that.
Anyone else in the audience that would like to speak? Chief, we heard a lot from you the other night.
I'd like to respond to some of those because there's some misinformation there, Mayor, and I'll make it quick.
Please do.
I was provided some information from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Justice. In 2017, the highest rate of officers to individuals among city population groups was an average of 3.8 officers per 1,000 inhabitants in cities fewer than 10,000 residents, okay? So there's one. So that kind of gives you a perspective. We're at 2,800 residents, and you do the math. The other thing I want to talk about is the position we have as the traffic safety coordinator is 100%. We actually make money on that. So that's a non-issue. As Matt was talking about, the contract is $15,000 a year. I can't speak for Panton, but I know it's Ferrisburg is $15,000 a year, and we did the math based on what we get for hourly wages. We figured it'd be about 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, which is flexible, or if Ferrisburg decided to contract with us, that would be it. So basically, we would be able to bring $15,000 in, and for 1 hour a day, that officer would be working in Ferrisburg. And of course, if a call came in, they could revert back here, and we'd certainly do right with whoever we work for. Response to the comment about drugs. When I came here in 2009, we quickly realized we had a problem with drugs, and we had drunk driving. Since then, we've made over 400 DUI arrests. And incidentally, when we have a drug recognition expert that goes out, we have 2 officers that fit that bill, that is paid for by, if they get called out. If they're off duty and they get called out, that is paid for. We don't pay for that. We do not pay for that. And then the last thing about the drugs. When drugs go from wherever south to points north, the drugs come back here. The drugs come back here, and it affects the health and welfare of our city. It affects the health and welfare of the people, the kids that grow up here, and the people that are predisposed to that. So if we turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to going after those people that are going through, and I will tell you, the number of consent searches has dropped dramatically. We are doing a disservice for the people. We're not doing our job. Because they come back and they burglarize our houses. They rob our stores and our banks. They rob our local convenience store. I will not participate in that. I will not subscribe to that. That's not what I raised my hand for. I came here to protect you. And if somebody is inferring that I should ignore that, they're wrong. And as far as the number of tickets we write, our average is around 60-40. And the last thing I will leave you with this. Unless somebody has been to a house or a business where there's an open door, and I take pride in the fact that we go around with our night eyes cards and put them in the doors and let people know that they have a door unlocked, or we call somebody. Have any of you ever gone to a house and found somebody in the house? And if we find somebody in the house, can you imagine how much anxiety and how much that amps us up to find somebody in there? I want you to think about that. I understand for people that don't know law enforcement, it's hard for them to understand that, but I'm giving it to you straight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Hi, I'm Amy Barr, and I grew up here as well. I think this is a really tough situation. I don't know, honestly, how I would vote if I were you right now. I think what Mel says makes a lot of sense. The timing is lousy. I really only want to speak to one thing. I have always felt safe in this city, and I would like you, when you're making your decision, to not think too hard about the fear-based arguments. That just bothers me. We can never be completely safe. Everyone would love for that to be true. I just hear a lot of people saying that, oh my goodness, the city is gonna fall apart if we cut our police force. That's the one thing that kind of bothers me. I don't think that's true, and yes, there would be consequences, and I'm not saying that they would be acceptable consequences. I don't know the answer, But the fear-mongering honestly bothers me, and I hope that you're not affected by that. That's all I have to say.
If there are no other comments, we're going to come back up to this table.
Mayor, I have one
Oh,
question.
yes.
I asked 3 questions, only 2 got answered. And that, has the council considered wage freeze for this year with the budget the way it is?
That has not been part of our conversations, Mike, no.
Thank you.
Technically, I have 49 seconds.
Okay.
Reclaiming your time?
Well, I realized that I did a terrible job at the 5 to 7 thing, so I really wanted to address that. So when you go to a call when you're a police officer, and no, I haven't been to a police officer, I'm not a police officer because I've never shot a gun, but I can tell you I do a lot of work with them, and I know what their calls look like. Their calls look like this. They go to a house for a domestic dispute, and they realize that somebody is under the influence. There's an underlying core issue here. It's not about the fact that mom and dad are having a fight, and the kid over in the corner is in fear, and to address the fear-mongering thing. It's about a quality call. These officers need to be trained beyond the training that they receive in their first year. They have to know the local resources. They have to know Women's Safe. They have to know the local churches. They have to know all those things so that they can serve the actual issue, and they have to be psychiatrists to do so. They have to be patient. These are not normal calls. They take a lot of time, and they take a lot of addressing. I have been that kid in that house where mom was an opioid addict, and I needed somebody else. I needed a community to support me. I needed somebody better than what I had. Law enforcement is part of that process. They are first response. They are the first people oftentimes to see that kid. And then they see him again in that school when they're doing prevention work. And then they see him again on that street when they're crossing the crosswalk, and they go over and they have a quick conversation check-in with them. They are more than just response. They are quality calls. You're talking about quality calls. And that's what I meant the other day when I said quality officers. You have quality officers here. And I think we've seen in the news that there's a huge difference between certain law enforcement officers. Law enforcement officers that take the time to address the calls versus law enforcement officers that are just willing to slap a pair of handcuffs on a mom and say, good luck in jail, opioid addict. Something that I want you to consider when you're considering cutting 2 of these quality employees.
Thank you. I do not see any other hands, so we are coming back to the table. Any more discussion up here from?
I'd like to bring up something that may go someplace or may not go someplace, but I mean, I respect what everyone has said here. I respect all of the people that called me and emailed me and so on, and this is an incredibly difficult decision. I think that Mel's point has you know, some possibility. The budget as amended by Mark is 89 cents, 89.2 cents. If we took the money out of the water tower fund and put it in the general fund or wherever, which should be, if we added that to Lynn's, she'd be at 94 cents. There's a 5-cent difference. And I'm just wondering if the people here, you know, well, actually, what I'm saying is, do I think that our employees would be willing to work hard to maybe split that difference to reduce that? And would we be able to set a rate that is maybe 92 cents and have everybody work their damnedest to try and make that happen, which actually comes back to what David said about setting the rate first. It's not what I had hoped would happen, but I think that this is so incredibly complex that I'm really torn.
I didn't quite get your numbers.
You were at 91 cents?
I was at 91.
That was keeping the bond payment in the water tower fund, which I would like to take out, which adds 3 cents.
I see.
The idea being we would have a rate, then we'd have to evaluate throughout the year.
Every department head would have to go back and we'd try and go line by line and cut where we had to.
Any comments to that, David?
I think I'll respond to that, and also to a comment that was made relative to revenue. It's not going to be like this forever. Everything changes. I mean, that's the one constant. And we do have plans in terms of additional revenue. So we understand that piece of it. We're in a very difficult situation right now. But the first step of that, and I hope that I'll have the support at this table, you hit the low-hanging fruit first, and the low-hanging fruit is we have to stop making decisions that negatively impact the city of Vergennes economically, and I'm talking about Northland's Job Corps. I'm talking about subsidized housing. And if we do those two things, that's a big step right there. Northland's Job Corps, and I'd give, Chief may have already talked about it, but the impact in terms of specifically relative to our police department here, it's incredibly significant. And it's egregious that a city of 2,600 people bears that burden with absolutely no remuneration from that facility.
But is there an option, David?
There is an option, and the option is that we put pressure on the state of Vermont to not renew the lease if they will not resume the payments that were negotiated at the time we agreed to host the facility a number of years ago. If they choose not to do that, they can leave. And it's a net benefit to the city of Vergennes.
Is it, David?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What about all
Chief
the
could
people
talk to
that?
that.
Yeah, but what about all the people that are employed there?
It's a net benefit to the city of Vergennes. Chief could talk to that point.
I appreciate your comments. I would tell you that I think that that this is a decision that is certainly well above our pay grade here.
It's not necessarily, because we haven't done anything about it for a great number of years. You know, the only thing that we did is, you know, lay down, roll over, and play dead when they told us they weren't paying us anymore. We've done nothing.
I appreciate that.
So that's not above our pay grade.
That does not help us with.
It doesn't, but I'm just making the point going forward that we have to stop doing things like that, because it has a negative impact, and it's real dollars, and we need to stop doing it. And it's absolutely our pay grade here. It's our pay grade to communicate to the state of Vermont, either find some way so that the city of Vergennes receives remuneration for the services that we provide, or don't renew the lease, the DOL, and they can go elsewhere. So that is within our pay grade here.
Anyone else like to comment?
Excuse me?
Do you know when that took place?
When what took place?
When the state of Vermont said that they were no longer...
It wasn't the state of Vermont. I mean, Mel would know the history as well as I did. It was the Department of Labor, but it was negotiated at the time we decided to host the facility. And it was, what was it? Well, you weren't here, Mel. It was when Randy Friday was city manager. When was that, Joan? When it was lost in 1999. So you do the math. They were paying us $100,000 a year. Do the math from 1999 to now, and you'll get an idea of what the negative impact has been to the city of Vergennes.
Yes, sir.
I just have a question for clarification. And the sense that you're talking about, some 91 cents, 88 cents, whatever, are these numbers taking into account the fund balance or not?
Alderman Donald's proposal does recommend taking $30,000 out of the general fund balance.
50.
Oh, 50. I apologize. 50,000. I apologize. Sorry.
Now, Mel, refresh my memory, but I remember years when we would have a fund balance of $100,000 or $130,000, and we would vote to carry forward $100,000 to the next year.
Current year, you know, when I did the projections, my projections actually were around $135,000 surplus, and the city council allocated $90,400 to offset, if you will.
What happens to the balance?
And that let me just say this, that 120, that 135 actually turned into 123. So you actually had a $33,000 pad right on day one of the current fiscal year. Okay. So what were you saying, you wondered what happened?
Well, so what that is the difference between what the council votes to carry forward and the actual surplus is the pad.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. And so, I mean, there's no right answer here. If today the projection is $91,000, it's really no different than a year ago today. My projection was 135. The council, I had confidence in that number, and the council allocated $90,000. And obviously, the line is that $123,000 isn't your money, folks at the front of the table. It's our money. All right, we're the ones that paid it today. And so that's why they allocate that money to reduce the tax rate in the ensuing year. It's really our money. And so this year, if it looks like 91,000, but we're still puzzled about that. Matt would agree, Joan would agree, right? I think that 50 is a safe number, all right? But folks, if the auditors come in here and find out that the 50 turned into 49, don't shoot me, all right? But I think that 50 is safe. I think Matt would agree. I agree with that. If I said 80, you suggest use 89 to 91, I think Matt would say no. So I'm not. There isn't a right answer.
So if I change the $72,500 bonded debt out of the water tower fund, could we get an agreement here?
What does that bring the rate to?
I don't know.
Well, I think it'd be 94 cents.
It'd be 94 plus cents.
What did you say exactly, Lynn? I'm sorry.
If I left everything else the same, it seems to me, if I'm understanding this council, is the $72,000 that we've taken from the water tower fund in the past wants to be absorbed into the general budget now. Mm-hmm. So if I amended my amendment to take that out, could we have an agreement on all the rest? That's my question.
Ask what all the rest is. I'm so confused as to where you guys are. I mean, back and forth and whatever, and there's been multiple amendments and suggestions. I'd like to understand before, I appreciate you're calling for a decision, that would be great, but can we recap what the decision is, or potentially is?
Well, I'm suggesting that we take $50,000 of the carryover. I'm also saying use $13,500 from the watershed fund. Oh.
What I don't understand is how that relates to what else is on the table. So he made 2 amendments. Those were passed, right?
One of which we passed.
Okay.
Oh, we did pass the sidewalk and the boiler.
So now, Ms. Donnelly is suggesting that we move some other money, right? But basically, that is to keep the 2 full-time officers.
Correct.
Okay.
And that difference is essentially that 5 cents on the tax rate.
Right.
Which would be about $140,000 or $135,000, which is about what the budget shows.
Right. The deputy mayor has asked a question of the council.
Just to clarify, what we'd be looking at is remove the boiler line item, remove the sidewalk line item, and have a $50,000 carryover. That's what we're, and.
Correct.
And then.
And maintain
no-
staffing.
And maintain
staffing, so not the 2, and then.
And
You're removing 13.5 from the 25? Is that
Yes.
the idea?
yes,
From the rec budget.
yeah.
Correct.
Watershed fund.
13.5
Which
for-
would put our tax rate at approximately 94 cents? Correct.
So up 11 cents.
93.5.
Up 11 cents.
Right now, we're at 83.5.
What you're proposing would increase the taxes by 11 cents.
What was just stated, it's around
10 cents, 10.5 cents.
But that does not take into consideration, just my thinking out loud, is are we going to go back to each department and look at a reduction in every department? that's not on the table yet. And that was part of the proposals that we could look, that someone had suggested on Tuesday night, that every department take a 5% cut.
But that would be for the next budget. That wouldn't be for, you're voting on something now that would be for this budget. Why would we not cut it now?
The responsibility of the council is to set the municipal tax rate tonight. And we can, we can back into that number. If the council says you have 98 cents, 88 cents, and that sets my that sets my guidance. And if that's the number I need to hit, that's the number we would hit. Speaking with Mel today, I was thinking about when we went through this process last year, and at the end of the deliberation of the council, he finally said, what's the number? Give me a number. Tell me how much, you are willing to spend. And then the council set the rate, and Mel backed into it, basically. Correct, Mel? Yeah. And I understand why now. That makes a lot of sense.
If we can't realize those savings, all it's going to do is reduce the fund balance at the end of the year, or maybe have a negative balance, which puts us in a difficult position 1 year from now.
1 year from now.
So either we do it, or we all should resign.
Right. I have to tell you that I feel pretty strongly that our budget lacks very little fat. And I'm very concerned about going back to each of the departments. I'm not convinced that we're going to 5% in every department.
I don't believe that we will. But it would hurt. We're talking about hurting a department there. So does misery love company? I don't know. It's council's decision.
Yep.
I'm not sure exactly where we are.
Yeah, me either.
If you do one more year, you have a motion
on the floor.
We do have a motion on the floor.
So it would be great if you could clean it up by doing something with the motion on the floor, whether you agree with it or not, and if you don't, make another motion.
Correct.
That would be the right way to go.
So confused, and we can, if we're gonna start talking about just setting the price, the rate, and back into a budget over the next week, then.
Feel free to pull your amendment. Or your motion, rather.
Okay, so I can withdraw my motion for now, withdraw the motion. And I think the second needs to withdraw.
So
Yeah.
where does that leave us?
We are
now
still
we
under
have-
the, well, I was
Your motion was
amending, withdrawing the motion to amend the motion from 2 meetings ago.
You got that, Joan?
You can just say, forget what Mark said.
Yeah.
Just delete me from the meeting.
And your second needs to also agree.
Yes.
And the second was?
Me.
Yes.
I agree.
So now we're just back to having an original motion on the table to the original budget.
That's correct.
Which could also be withdrawn at this time.
Withdrawn.
I'm not sure who seconded that. I believe you did.
I second the original. Well, so you're looking to withdraw it?
Yeah. And then we'll just start from a clean slate. We have nothing.
Then I will
hanging over us.
second the withdrawal.
So now we have no motions on the
So we're
table.
at the very beginning.
Now we start with a clean slate. And let's talk about the tax rate.
I'll make a motion for 92 cents with no police cuts.
It wouldn't matter what it is. It's just, we're saying 92 cents.
But then
We can't do no police cuts because we're not addressing the budget. We're just setting the tax rate.
That would be, if there was deficit spending, it'd be up to the manager to
Yeah.
deal with that and to ask
Can I
our
withdraw?
supervision.
Well,
No, you can make the tax rate.
yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
you can make a motion to set the tax rate to 92 cents.
Does that seem like,
She made a motion, Joan, to set the tax rate at 92 cents.
I can second that.
It's just setting the budget.
I guess I can't do that.
We're just setting the tax rate. We're not addressing the budget.
I've seconded, so we can discuss.
Mark did. Motion is made and seconded. Now we can discuss it.
I think now we may want to offer an opportunity for more public comment, because now what we're getting down to is how much money are we going to allow you to keep
We've got a very narrow slice of the public. I mean, we've got people here who, well, people in the city who are not here because they're working their third job.
I
So,
understand that.
I think we can hear from you, but it's not going to be especially relevant to the 24, 26, 28, however many people live here, because I've heard various different numbers over the past week, but.
I would absolutely agree. And the point that I'm getting at is, I mean, we were somewhere up in the neighborhood of 20 cents on Tuesday, and I'll go on record and say that's absolutely absurd.
Well, we're not there now.
We're not there
We're
not there now.
I absolutely understand that, but as a point of reference, I want everybody to understand that that's where we were on Tuesday and how ludicrous that number was. And so tonight, let's talk about a number that you folks can live with. What is it? I mean, put it in the form, it's a percent.
I do.
8.5 cents is 10%.
Understood.
We were hearing from this group last Tuesday that 20 cents was acceptable.
That's what I'm saying. And I'm going on record and saying that's ludicrous. And you may all disagree with me, and that's fine, but.
But I agree with Mark is that we have such a small slice of the population who are gonna feel that tax increase, right? And it's not only the folks who are property owners, it's the folks who are renters, whose landlords are gonna get a hit and their margins are gonna get squeezed and they're gonna raise rent. I mean, I am concerned that by taking a room of however many people and saying that is everyone in the city, especially all the comments that we all received this week, that scares me. It should scare everybody.
I absolutely agree, and I'm not suggesting that I or we as a body make a decision based on that. I mean, it's not the way we do things. But what I'm encouraging everyone to do is to take, because I think that for the most part, I don't know, I could be wrong. I don't think anybody, when they have an opportunity to look at it, thinks that 20 cents is reasonable. When you actually consider what that means, when you go and write your check and bring it up to Joan Devine at City Hall, it doesn't make any sense. And
No,
so.
we're not. Right. David, I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt you here because
That's fine.
we're not talking about 20 cents.
I understand that, but what I'm trying to do is frame the discussion so we can talk about a number that's reasonable.
Well, and I think that's up to this body to determine.
I guess that is what we need to decide.
Right.
Understood.
So, to put this in perspective, there's 4 cents that we have to add, period, that we have no say in, none.
Healthcare.
Healthcare.
Pass it on to the employees. That solves that. End of discussion.
We were just talking about the fact that it's not fair in 2 days to rip somebody, but it's fair in 2 days to cut somebody's pay.
You're telling these guys that they have to take a pay cut.
It can't be done.
It is for discussion
So
for
with that
next year.
being said, 4 cents has to be added. So I think we were at 83 something. So we're adding 5 cents for sidewalks, recreation, all the things that people said they wanted. So I'm losing 2 cents. I'm willing to compromise. The rest of the board needs to compromise too. Understanding that half of this increase we have no control over. So we could sit here all night and say 88 cents, 89 cents, but why aren't we realistic in saying 92 cents makes sense based on what we have been asked to do? That's our responsibility.
I completely see that compromise is the only way we're going to get through this.
Exactly.
Right? I completely agree. I think one thing that I've heard over and over again from, the city manager is looking at the budgets for these departments and understanding that there's not a lot to cut here. And so I think that is where we have to figure out if we're going to compromise, that's going to come out of.
We don't know where yet.
We don't know where yet, and I have.
Or we pay the piper a year from now.
Which is what we've said for the last.
And that will help us look at the budget more closely. It will help us analyze the police department in more detail.
Right.
Because this has not been enough time to really do the due diligence we should have done in order to decide whether or not to cut 1 or 2 employees. And that was a difficult decision for all of us.
Right.
And we haven't seen a full revenue page yet.
I'm confused by the numbers you just said, though. So we have to have 4% because of healthcare.
Well, that might not
Adding
be
back
true now that
in-
it's 80,
Right, but-
26,000. Is
But-
that true now?
No, it's not 26,000. Again, that was an inflated number based on the error in the grant list.
No, we're actually 22,000.
22.
A penny is not 26,000?
No.
It's
22,600.
Oh, jeez.
But by putting back the 2 FTEs, that's a 6.5 cent increase, correct?
Well, close, yeah.
So that's on top of the 4, so there's 10.5 of the 11.5 cent that
147,000.
you've made. So that gets us to 90.5, no, 90,
No, it's like 92.
91. So
90 well,
that
yeah,
gives us a
91
penny
too.
for everything else on that 92. So 92 really,
To get everything, it would be 94.
yeah.
Right. Because that was Len's original proposal, right?
Yes.
Was,
And I'm willing to compromise.
yeah, right.
But the
like-
compromise has to come from everybody
Well,
else,
but
too.
the compromise would be everything except police. So everything
Well,
else would
we
have to
don't
get
know
cut.
that yet.
Well,
I see what you mean.
we can look at the police budget too. I mean,
I
the
mean,
chief.
we do not know that yet.
If we say you have to cut something,
True,
then his decision is to cut
I was
something.
doing exactly what you did when you
Yeah.
made your amendments. I was confusing the two. So tax rate versus, okay, I'm good.
So how that would work from, I mean, that would be then Matt's discretion to look
To
at
talk to department heads.
each department head and say, this is the number you have to cut.
And there might be a few different phases of that, conceivably.
Well, there aren't any phases.
Well,
You know.
well, it all depends on where, what you're looking at as the year goes on, but it's,
Yeah, but we're setting the budget for the year, so, we can have a long-term strategy that looks at 2021, 2022, but, these are going to be immediate impacts
Yeah,
to staff.
hopefully, yes,
Yeah, to
yes.
departments, yeah.
I'm also not crazy about the idea there should be an equitable reduction across the board because other departments have been skimping in order to keep the police department to do what it's doing. So it doesn't seem fair that now Public Works or wastewater is now have to find more to cut when they really haven't had that much added to them over the last number of years.
So they don't have as much to cut, you're saying?
Right. They haven't.
Why can't we
gained
utilize what Mel said and look at the budgets and find out where the capital expenses are, and we utilize the water tower fund for those purposes so that we can keep it to 92 cents?
there really aren't very many in the budget.
There are a few.
Well, we've already pulled the boiler for the Vergennes Opera House out. And just as far as capital, I'm just not sure.
What IT upgrades, could they be considered capital? Because there's 18, or 12,000 in there for IT upgrade and one.
I
Maybe
don't
we'll
know
run
that that
more
fits the
capital.
definition of a
I don't think
capital
it hits the
improvement.
IRS.
Just trying to think outside the box.
No, absolutely, well, I get it.
You're right on that general idea, but I just wanted to, we were just saying, well, every department should try and find 5%. And I'm not sure it's fair
just have to make it
to some of the other departments to try and find 5% when they've just been given enough to survive for a number of years.
But my way would mean they wouldn't have to cut that out.
Right.
They would just have to figure out a way that we can keep pay for the 2 cents that's gonna be offset in a compromise. From 94 down to 92 cents.
The other thing to keep in mind is this year, then 92 cents becomes the baseline for next year that we're gonna raise on. And we'll just continue to kick the can down the road that it's gonna be more and more expensive. And next year, there will be a discussion at this table saying, well, we really should wait until next year to figure this out. Let's just hold off again and
That's assuming a couple of things, that we don't look at healthcare, that we keep everything the status quo as far as the benefits are concerned. I mean, those are things we haven't even talked about yet. And, to say that this 92 cents is a basis for next year, I don't know how we could possibly say that at this point.
because it'll be 92 cents next year. I mean, that's where we're going to be starting the conversation at. That's what I mean, is that's where we will start. Whereas this year, we are starting at 83.5 cents. That was where we were starting. Next year's starting point will be 92 cents.
Yeah, but it's really 87 and a half. We have to pay 4 cents. We have to.
Nobody out there is going to be.
So I don't want to get in the weeds, but Chief, you've got $13,000 for body cams and an extra $5,000 for training, for courses, I think it is, supplies and equipment. Would you forego $18,000 to keep your employee?
We've improvised back.
Training.
No, supplies and equipment went from 5 to 10, and body cams are 13. It's $18,000.
Right now, we have a grant through the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and we have a match. Now, I can take care of some of the body cameras. I told that to the city manager that we can take what we have from grant money, and we have some asset forfeiture money from a drug seizure. I can take that and buy some, no impact on the city, okay? So that's done. As far as the equipment piece, I'd have to look at that again. I can't remember everything that goes into it because equipment.
Well, yeah, supplies, equipment, and postage is what it is.
Yeah, that's kind of an all-inclusive. Now, I will throw another suggestion out to you. I will take a $10,000 cut and pay. No, listen. It's not going to hurt me. I will take a $10,000 cut and pay, and we've got about $5,000 worth of traffic revenue still coming in because we call the Judicial Bureau.
But the other ones don't step up.
Well, no. Listen, my police officers do not make that much money. They're not taking a cut. Listen, you're not going to hurt me. It's out there. If it means an officer staying or going, I can do it without any. And Matt and I've offered to this, I've offered this to all of you, and it still stands there.
Thank you, Chief. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Just to be clear, the body cams, the $13,000 in the budget is the delta between what he said the cost would be minus his asset forfeiture and potential grant information. So that's the number that would be required to get the cameras.
So we can get half the whole versus a whole, and maybe next year we can do it, look at it again.
And if I'm correct in saying, the officers can't share those, they're one per officer, right? I remember having. That'd be new information, because I remember when the chief addressed his council previous this year, was that these are, it's like a firearm you wouldn't share, but.
It's not a best practice.
It could be a short-term.
Yes.
Could be a short-term fix.
So actually, respectfully, everyone, we have decided that we're not going to sit here and pick apart the budget. We're here to determine what our tax rate is.
Well, I think Bill's point was, let's see.
I understand that.
Is there a motion at 92 cents?
There is not. Was there a second?
Yes.
Oh, there was a
We're in
second.
discussion right now.
All right, we are in discussion. Okay.
We're doing it right.
Okay.
I'll call a question.
At 92 cents. The question has been called. Everyone in favor of the tax rate at 92 cents, please say aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry? Oh, you're absolutely right. Thank you very much. The question has been called. Is everyone in favor? Those who are, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And now, all those in favor of a tax rate at 92 cents, please say aye.
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 Yeah.
Opposed.
The motion carries. The tax rate is set at 92 cents. One opposition.
Correct.
The anticlimactic.
Anticlimactic.
The big exhale.
All right. Yeah, go right ahead, please.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Motion is made and seconded. Any discussion?